Hallo. The night it all began felt like any other. We had friends over for dinner. Emily loved hosting, and she was damn good at it. She was charming, magnetic, even the kind of person who made people feel lucky just to be in her orbit. Watching her work a room used to fill me with pride. That night, though, something felt off. Not in the air, not in the room, just in her. Her laughter was too loud. Her glances too quick. I noticed how she poured our friend Eric another glass of wine before he even asked. The way her hand brushed his arm when she leaned in to tell a joke. The way his eyes stayed on her a second too long. My gut churned, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to be that guy, the insecure husband reading into things that weren't there. After dinner, Emily disappeared into the kitchen. I went to grab more plates and found her and Eric standing closer than they should have been. Their voices low. She stepped back the second I entered, her eyes darting to mine. "Just talking about work," she said quickly, flashing her rehearsed hostess smile. Eric grabbed the plates and muttered something about helping the others. Emily stayed frozen, staring at the countertop like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "Is there something I'm missing?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She turned, her expression a perfect mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you talking about? We were just talking." "Don't be weird, Matt." I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But that night, as the last of the guests left and Emily busied herself with cleaning up, my mind wouldn't stop racing. There was something too polished about her denials, too perfect. I replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over. Finally, I pushed it aside. I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin my night. Then came the next morning. I woke up to an empty bed. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, so I figured Emily was up early. But as I walked downstairs, I didn't hear the usual clatter of dishes or the hum of the news on the TV. Instead, I heard her voice. Low, sharp, and unfamiliar. She was on the phone, pacing by the window. "I said I'd handle it," she hissed. "Just don't text me like that again." He almost saw last night. My heart stopped. I froze halfway down the stairs, trying to piece together what I just heard. He almost saw? Who was she talking about? What was there to see? Before I could move, she hung up and spun around, startled to see me. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the storm building inside me. Her face twisted into something I hadn't seen before, a mix of annoyance and defiance. "No one," she said, brushing past me like I didn't exist. "Just work stuff. You're always jumping to conclusions." I watched her walk away, my stomach churning with something between anger and fear. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't small. That morning wasn't the end of it. It was just the first crack in the mirror, and I couldn't stop staring at the jagged edges. That day, the tension between Emily and me was a living, breathing thing. I watched her move through the house like nothing had happened, humming to herself while she folded laundry and checked her phone. She was eerily composed, almost too calm, which only made the knot in my stomach tighten. I decided to play along, let her think I'd bought the work stuff excuse. I didn't want to confront her until I had more than a gut feeling and a few suspicious words, so I stayed quiet and observant, pretending everything was fine. But later that afternoon, she made a mistake. I walked into the living room to grab my keys and saw her phone on the couch, unlocked. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. I wasn't that guy, but something in me snapped. The memory of her whispering on the phone, the tension in her voice, the lie, it all boiled over. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. The screen was open to a text thread. The name at the top wasn't familiar. Logan, work. At first, the messages seemed innocent, banter about meetings, shared jokes about their boss. But as I scrolled, the tone shifted. Logan. Last night was perfect. Wish we had more time. Emily. Me too. You always leave me wanting more. Logan. Think he noticed anything? Emily. Don't worry, he's clueless. My hands shook as I read the words. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out, replaced with a cold, heavy weight. Clueless. She thought I was clueless. I heard footsteps and quickly locked the phone, putting it back where I found it just as Emily walked into the room. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. You okay? She asked casually. Fine, I said, my voice strained. Just thinking about work. She nodded and sat down on the couch, grabbing her phone without a second thought. I stood there for a moment, my head spinning, before muttering something about running an errand and leaving the house. Once I was outside, I parked at the end of the street and tried to process what I'd just seen. Anger bubbled up inside me, white-hot and blinding, but it was quickly drowned by a crushing wave of betrayal. 8 years. 8 years of marriage, and this was how it all came crashing down? I wanted to storm back in and demand answers, but I knew Emily too well. She was slippery, clever with her words. If I didn't have solid proof, she'd gaslight me, twist the narrative until I doubted myself. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my buddy Kevin, the one friend who'd always been brutally honest with me, and told him everything. "Man, this is bad," Kevin said after I finished. "But you can't go in half-cocked. You need more than a few texts if you're going to confront her. If she's lying, she'll bury you in excuses. How the hell am I supposed to get proof?" I snapped, frustration seeping into my voice. Kevin hesitated, then said, "I hate to say it, but maybe it's time to play dirty. Check her phone, follow her. If she's cheating, she'll slip up again." It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but he was right. Emily had already shown her hand once. If I stayed patient, she'd show it again. That night, I sat across from her at the dinner table, watching her smile and chat as if nothing had happened. It was a performance, every word and gesture rehearsed. But behind the mask, I could see it now, the cracks, the lies. I wasn't clueless anymore. I knew Emily was lying. What I didn't know was how far the lie went, or how much worse it could get. That night, I sat in bed with her beside me, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She laughed softly at something on the screen, then turned it away from me. I felt like I was watching a stranger. The plan started forming in my head before I could second-guess it. I needed proof, undeniable, inescapable evidence. And if Emily thought I was clueless, I could use that to my advantage. The next morning, I set the trap. "Hey, babe," I said over breakfast, forcing my voice to stay casual. "I've got a work trip coming up next weekend. I'll be gone Friday to Sunday." Her head snapped up, her fork pausing midair. For just a second, her expression shifted. Was that relief? Excitement? But she quickly masked it with a neutral smile. "Oh? Where to?" "Chicago," I lied. "Client meetings." She nodded, going back to her plate. "Sounds boring, but at least you'll get a break from the chaos here." Her words were so smooth, so practiced, I almost believed her. But deep down, I knew exactly what she was thinking. My absence meant freedom. For the rest of the week, I played the role of the clueless husband perfectly. I smiled, joked, acted like everything was fine. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing. I set up a small camera in the living room, disguised as a clock, and synced it to my phone. I hated how sneaky it felt, but I wasn't going to let her gaslight me when the truth came out. Friday came, and I kissed her goodbye like I always did, pretending I was headed to the airport. Instead, I parked my car a few streets away and waited. Hours passed, and I started to wonder if I'd been wrong, if maybe I'd let paranoia take over. But around 8 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to our driveway. My heart dropped as I watched Emily step outside, dressed in a way she hadn't for me in years. She looked good, too good for someone supposedly spending the night alone. Then he got out of the car. Logan. I recognized him from the photo on her phone. He was tall, well-dressed, and smug in a way that made my blood boil. They didn't waste time. Logan followed her inside, and I watched through the app as they laughed and poured drinks. She was glowing, completely at ease, like she didn't have a husband who loved her just a few streets away. It was sickening, but I couldn't look away. I recorded everything, every laugh, every touch. By the time they disappeared upstairs, I felt like I'd been hollowed out. This wasn't just some fling. She was comfortable with him in a way that shattered me. I wanted to storm in, confront her, scream in her face, but I forced myself to wait. I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I called Kevin. "It happened," I said flatly. "What did you find?" "Everything." He came to the house. They were upstairs for hours. Kevin let out a low whistle. "Man, I'm sorry. What are you gonna do?" "I'm not done yet," I said, my voice cold. She thinks I'm gone until tomorrow. Let's see how much rope she needs to hang herself. Saturday was a blur of simmering rage and cold calculation. I spent the morning parked near our house, my phone in hand, watching the live feed from the hidden camera. Emily and Logan came downstairs around 10 a.m., looking like a couple on a romantic getaway. She made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table, laughing and leaning into each other. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. The audacity of it, carrying on like I didn't exist, like this wasn't my house, our life. At one point, Logan leaned over and kissed her. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. She kissed him back with a softness I hadn't seen in years. By noon, Logan left, giving her a quick goodbye kiss before driving off. She stood in the doorway, watching his car disappear down the street, a small, satisfied smile on her face. I knew I couldn't sit in that car all day. I had to make my move before I lost my nerve. The confrontation. I waited until 3 p.m., when I knew she wouldn't expect me back. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside. The house smelled like fresh coffee and perfume, hers the same scent she used to wear when we were first dating. Emily came out of the kitchen, her face lighting up in surprise. "Matt, you're home early," she said, her voice just a little too high-pitched. I didn't answer right away. I set my bag down slowly, deliberately, and stared at her. She looked nervous now, her smile faltering. "Is everything okay? Why don't you tell me?" I said evenly, my voice low and controlled. Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and hit play on the video. There it was, Logan stepping into our house, her laughing, their kiss. The color drained from her face as the realization hit. "Matt, I can explain," she stammered, her hands trembling. "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back? How you brought him into our home, into our bed." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, the woman who always had a clever comeback was at a loss. "I gave you everything," I continued, the anger spilling out now. "8 years of my life. And this is how you repay me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't buying it. She wasn't sorry, not really. She was caught and she knew it. "Matt, it was a mistake," she finally said, her voice breaking. "A mistake." I barked out a bitter laugh. "One mistake? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a pattern. How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. "How long, Emily?" I demanded, stepping closer. She looked down, wringing her hands like a child caught stealing candy. "A few months," she whispered. "Months." That one word felt like a punch to the gut. "Why?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Why would you do this to us?" Her eyes flashed with something I didn't expect. Defensiveness. "Because I was miserable, Matt," she shot back. "You stop trying. You don't make me feel special anymore. Logan, he listens to me. He makes me feel alive." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. Miserable? I had been working my ass off to give us a good life, to build something stable. And she threw it all away because she was bored? "So what? You thought sneaking around with him was the answer?" I asked, my voice trembling with fury. She folded her arms, her tears gone now, replaced with defiance. "Maybe if you paid attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." The audacity of her words left me speechless. She wasn't apologizing. She was blaming me for her betrayal. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and realized she was a stranger. The love I'd clung to for years was gone, replaced by something bitter and twisted. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'll pack my things tonight. I'll call a lawyer on Monday." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care anymore. Whatever we had was over, shattered beyond repair. As I walked upstairs to grab a bag, I heard her voice behind me, cold and venomous. "Fine. Leave. You're good at that." Her words didn't stop me. They only confirmed what I already knew. The woman I loved was gone. I didn't leave that night. I wanted to, more than anything, but something in me refused to give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I stayed. Not because I wanted to fight for her, no, that part of me had burned away, but because I wanted control. I wasn't going to be the one retreating from my house. Emily spent the evening slamming doors and pacing around, her phone glued to her hand. I knew who she was texting. I didn't care. Every second she spent trying to twist this into being my fault only made me calmer, colder. I sat on the couch watching the clock camera footage of Logan from the day before. Over and over, like a blade sharpening against a whetstone. Each replay honed my resolve. By midnight, the house was silent. Emily had retreated to our bedroom, but I stayed downstairs. I couldn't stomach the idea of lying beside her. Instead, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started writing down everything. Every time she had worked late. Every time she had an unexplained expense or a last-minute cancellation. Every message from Logan. This wasn't just for me. This was for the lawyer I planned to call first thing Monday morning. The morning fallout. The next day, Emily came downstairs acting like nothing had happened. She had the nerve to pour herself a cup of coffee, humming softly, as if we hadn't just set fire to our entire marriage. When she saw me sitting at the table, she froze. "You didn't leave," she said flatly. "No," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. Are we going to talk about this?" I snapped the laptop shut and stared at her, my jaw tight. "Talk about what? The part where you cheated on me? Or the part where you blamed me for it?" She flinched but recovered quickly. "I'm not the only one at fault here, Matt," she said, her voice defensive. "You've been distant for years. It's like you forgot I existed." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "You're unbelievable. You didn't even try to fix things. You just ran straight into his arms." "I didn't run. Spare me," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "I saw the texts, Emily. I saw the video. Don't you dare stand there and pretend this was anything but a choice you made over and over again." For a moment I thought she might crack. Her lip trembled, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. But then she stiffened, her expression hardening. "You know what? Fine. Maybe it was a choice. Because at least Logan sees me, Matt. At least he makes me feel alive. When was the last time you even looked at me like I was someone you wanted?" Her words hit like a slap, but this time they didn't hurt. They just made me angrier. "And what's Logan going to do, Emily?" I asked, standing up. "You think he's going to leave his life for you? Move in here? Play stepdad to a broken marriage? You're nothing more than a fling to him, and deep down you know it." Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "I gave you everything, Emily. More than you deserved. And now you get nothing from me. No love, no trust, not even my respect." I walked past her, grabbing my keys from the counter. She didn't follow me, didn't say a word. I drove away without looking back, my mind already shifting to the next steps. The unexpected twist. By noon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, laying everything out. The texts, the video, the timeline I had pieced together. The lawyer, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, nodded as I spoke, occasionally jotting down notes. "This is solid," she said finally. "But if you want to ensure a clean split, I'd recommend holding back for now. Don't tip your hand. Let her think she's winning. Then serve her the papers when she least expects it." Her advice made sense, but I hated the idea of waiting. Every second I stayed in that house was torture. "Do you think she'll fight me on this?" I asked. The lawyer shrugged. "That depends. Does she want to protect her image? Or will she try to squeeze something out of you to make it worth her while?" I clenched my fists, imagining Emily playing the victim. It was exactly the kind of move she'd pull. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a text. "Emily, we need to talk when you get home." My stomach tightened. Whatever she had to say, I knew it wouldn't be an apology. But this time I was ready. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a queen about to deliver a royal decree. Her phone was in one hand, a glass of wine in the other. It was early for her to be drinking, but I didn't comment. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Go ahead." Her expression was tight, a blend of anger and determination. "This situation can't go on. I know you're upset, but this marriage isn't working. It hasn't been for a long time." I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. You're kidding me, right? You burned the house down. And now you want to act like we were both holding the match. Matt, listen to me, she said, her tone growing sharper. You've been checked out for years. I tried to make it work, but you were always too busy, too distracted. Logan just filled a gap you left wide open. Her words were meant to hurt, but they didn't land the way she wanted. Instead, they fueled the fire already raging inside me. So that's your grand excuse? I asked, stepping closer. I didn't shower you with enough attention. So you brought another man into my home? Into our bed? She rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it made my blood boil. You're so dramatic. It's not like I planned for this to happen. Logan and I just connected. Connected, I echoed, my voice rising. You connected so hard you couldn't keep it out of our house? Out of my life. Her calm facade cracked, and she set the wine glass down with a loud clink. What do you want from me, Matt? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. But don't pretend you're some perfect husband who didn't contribute to this mess. I want you to own what you did, I said, my voice low and steady. I want you to stop blaming me for your betrayal. She stood up, crossing her arms, and met my gaze with a defiant glare. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you're the victim here. But let's be honest, Matt. You've been a ghost in this marriage for years. At least Logan noticed me. It was in that moment I realized just how far gone she was. Emily wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was angry at me for daring to hold her accountable. The breaking point. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the video. Without saying a word, I pressed play and held it out to her. She went pale as Logan's face filled the screen, walking into our house like he owned it. Her hand flew to her mouth as the sounds of their laughter echoed from the speakers. Stop, she said weakly. Why? I asked, my voice cold. This is what you wanted, right? To be noticed? To feel alive? Look at it, Emily. Look at what you did. She swatted the phone out of my hand, her face twisting in anger. You're disgusting. Spying on me like some psycho. Don't. I interrupted, my voice like ice. Don't you dare turn this on me. You're the one who lied, who cheated, who made a mockery of everything we built. And now you're mad because I caught you. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing heavily, her hands clenched at her sides. Then, as if a switch flipped, her expression shifted. You know what? Fine, she said, her voice dripping with venom. If you want to end this, let's end it. But don't expect me to walk away quietly. You want war, Matt? You've got it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with threat. War, I said, stepping closer, my face inches from hers. Emily, you already lost. You just don't know it yet. With that, I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard her voice, sharp and mocking. Run, Matt. That's all you're good at. I didn't stop. Her words couldn't touch me anymore. I was done being her punching bag, her excuse, her scapegoat. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was finally back in control, that I didn't look back when I walked out of that house. Emily's voice echoed in my head. Mocking, venomous, but hollow. She wanted to push me, bait me into breaking down. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I spent the night at Kevin's place. He handed me a beer and sat silently while I stared at the wall, my thoughts a swirling storm. What's next? He asked finally, his tone cautious. She wants war, I said flatly, setting the bottle down. So I'll give her one. Kevin's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't argue. Instead, he handed me his laptop. Then let's make sure you win. Building the arsenal. Over the next few days, I went into overdrive. I gathered every scrap of evidence I could find. Texts, videos, financial records. Emily's recklessness worked against her. She hadn't bothered to cover her tracks. There were charges on our joint credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never stayed in. Emails from Logan, buried in her archives, planning meetups and exchanging photos. Every piece felt like a dagger, but I added it to the pile. The lawyer I'd met with earlier was impressed. This is more than enough for a favorable divorce, she said. But if she wants a fight, be prepared. People like your wife don't go down quietly. She wasn't wrong. The unexpected blow. By Wednesday, Emily started her counterattack. I came home to find the locks changed. My key didn't work, and my stomach twisted in a mix of anger and disbelief. I rang the doorbell, forcing myself to stay calm. She opened the door, her arms crossed, her expression smug. "Didn't think you'd actually leave me the house," she said. "This is still my house," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You think changing the locks will stop me?" She shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm just protecting myself. You've been acting unstable." "Unstable?" I laughed bitterly. "That's rich, coming from you." She smirked, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You can come back when you've calmed down. Maybe when you're ready to have a reasonable discussion about this." I stepped closer, meeting her gaze. "Emily, I'm going to say this once. Don't push me." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, slamming the door in my face. That night, I filed an emergency motion through my lawyer to regain access to the house. It was petty, sure, but I wasn't going to let her win this round. The crack in her armor. The next day, I got a call from Kevin. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice buzzing with urgency. "What now?" "She's bragging," he said. "I heard from one of her coworkers. Emily's been telling people you're the one who cheated, that you've been losing your mind and stalking her. She's playing the victim, Matt." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. "Almost. Let her," I said, my tone ice cold. "The more she talks, the more ammo she gives me." Sure enough, her lies started spreading. Mutual friends reached out, confused and awkward, asking if what Emily said was true. I gave them the same response every time. "You'll see soon enough. The trap is set." By Friday, the court granted me temporary access to the house, and I wasted no time. I walked in while Emily was out, her scent still lingering in the air. The place was immaculate, almost eerily so, as if she'd been scrubbing away her guilt. I went straight to the bedroom. There, in her nightstand, I found the final nail in her coffin. A journal. I didn't know she still kept one, but as I flipped through the pages, my suspicions were confirmed. She had written everything. Every detail of her affair with Logan. Every justification for her actions. Every excuse for why it was somehow my fault. But the kicker? The entries weren't just about me. There were pages where she vented about Logan. His shortcomings, his inability to fully commit, her frustration at feeling like the other woman. It was gold. When Emily came home that evening, she froze at the sight of me sitting at the dining table, her journal open in front of me. "You kept a diary?" I asked, my tone dripping with mock surprise. "How quaint." Her face drained of color. "You had no right." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "You don't get to play the victim here, Emily. Not anymore." She stepped forward, her voice rising. "This is harassment, Matt. You're stalking me, invading my privacy." "Harassment," I snapped, standing up and slamming the journal shut. "You've been lying, cheating, and trashing my name to everyone we know. But sure, let's talk about your privacy." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Here's the deal," I said, stepping closer. "You want war? You've got it. But don't expect to walk out of this unscathed. Because the moment we step into that courtroom, every lie, every text, every word you've written in this little book will be on the table. And I promise you, Emily, when this is over, you won't have a shred of credibility left." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. I picked up the journal and my bag, turning toward the door. "You wanted a fight? I hope you're ready for one." Monday morning arrived like the calm before a storm. Emily had no idea what was coming, but I did. My lawyer had everything: texts, videos, financial records, and her journal. The stage was set, and I was ready to end this once and for all. The courthouse was cold, clinical, and filled with an uncomfortable buzz of quiet conversations. Emily walked in with her lawyer, dressed to perfection in a navy blazer, her face a mask of confidence. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. Good. Let her sweat. The hearing started, and her lawyer wasted no time painting me as the bad guy. A neglectful, unstable husband who drove Emily into the arms of another man. They leaned heavily on the story Emily had been spreading to our friends, claiming I had been emotionally distant, controlling, and obsessed with my work. It was a good performance, but that's all it was. Theater. When my lawyer took the floor, the narrative shifted. "Your Honor," she began, her tone measured but sharp. "My client would like to introduce a series of exhibits that tell a very different story. One by one, the pieces of evidence were presented. The texts, the video footage, the credit card statements. Every lie Emily had told, every secret she thought she'd buried, came to light. Then came the journal. Exhibit E, my lawyer said, holding it up. A personal diary belonging to the respondent, detailing her affair in explicit detail, including dates, locations, and even complaints about her lover. Emily's face turned ashen. She whispered something to her lawyer, who looked equally rattled. "Objection," her lawyer called out, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "I'll allow it. Proceed." My lawyer read excerpts aloud, her voice calm and steady as she unraveled Emily's web of lies. The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of pages turning and Emily's shallow breaths. By the time my lawyer finished, the damage was done. Emily's image, the polished, confident woman who thought she could spin the story in her favor, was shattered. The final blow. When the judge called a recess, Emily stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking furiously against the tiled floor. I followed her, keeping a few steps behind, until she turned abruptly, her face twisted with rage. "You bastard!" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I met her glare with a calm she couldn't rattle. "You humiliated yourself, Emily. I just held up the mirror." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Matt." I smirked, leaning in just enough to match her tone. "Oh, it's over. You're just the last one to realize it." Her face crumpled for a moment, an almost imperceptible crack in her armor, before she turned on her heel and disappeared down the hall. Moving forward, the ruling was swift and decisive. The judge awarded me the house and a favorable financial settlement. Emily's attempts to spin the narrative in her favor fell apart under the weight of the evidence. By the end of the week, she was gone. Her things were packed, and the house was quiet in a way that felt strange but liberating. Kevin came over that night with a bottle of whiskey, and we sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the yard. "So," he said, pouring us both a glass. "What now?" I took a long sip, letting the warmth spread through me. "I rebuild," I said simply. "The lesson." Looking back, there were so many red flags I ignored, so many moments when I could have acted sooner. But hindsight didn't matter. What mattered was that I finally saw Emily for who she truly was, and walked away before she could drag me down with her. To anyone reading this, here's my advice. Trust your gut. When something feels wrong, don't bury it. Dig. Find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Because the pain of knowing is nothing compared to the pain of staying blind. As for Emily, she can have her lies, her excuses, her justifications. They're all she has left. And me, I've got a second chance. A clean slate. And that, for the first time in years, feels like enough. Bye-bye.